An old woman sat on a bench in the freezing cold for 3 days. Her story moved everyone to tears. It had been a few months since he had purchased his house, and he had never once felt regret for his choice. The man was pleased with each part of it, including the arrangement of the rooms, the interior design, and the design of the furniture. The house was really nice, and everyone who came to visit felt right at home. Everything in the house was always in its place, as if an invisible person kept everything in the house in order. Just before finding this location, Quentin inspected around a dozen other homes. However, none of them appeared to be as tidy and well organized as this particular house. Quentin thought it was most interesting that the person selling the house didn't seem very organized or neat. A man of approximately 45 years of age had a slight beer belly, eyes that were shifted, and hands that were shaking with excitement. Quentin had some reservations about this seller. He thought to himself, he seems strange in some way. However, after the man entered the house, it appeared as though the matter was no longer important. "I need to sell the house as soon as possible," the seller continued, twisting a baseball cap that had been worn down in his hands. He attempted to get Quentin to make a decision sooner rather than later. Even though Quentin felt anxious with the seller's persistence, he did not feel the need to postpone the purchase, since he was concerned that the house would be purchased by someone else. As a result, Quentin decided to purchase the house that he had a strong attraction to from the very beginning. Melanie, Quentin's wife, was over the moon that he had finally bought his own home. They rented housing in a poor neighborhood in the nearby city before they purchased the house. Before that, they lived in the neighboring city. Due to the fact that it was so risky, they were unable to get some sleep as they were constantly concerned that they would be robbed. On the other hand, their new house was situated in a peaceful and quiet neighborhood, which was of great importance to them because Melanie was expecting twins and was set to give birth to them in 2 months. "Imagine that," Melanie explained with joy. "We are going to have 2 babies in a short time." "I'm going to be a double dad," Quentin laughed as he hugged his wife. This particular winter was especially brutal, with a level of cold that was very uncommon even in Wyoming. Quentin made coffee in the kitchen after getting up earlier than usual. The man, who was shivering from the cold, peeked out the window and whistled in shock as he did so. The window got a thin layer of ice on them because of the change in temperature between the outside and the inside. It was just a small, clear circle that the man could look through, which allowed him to glimpse the outside world. As Quentin made his way through this tiny clearing, he came across an elderly woman who was sitting on the seat in front of his house. She was wearing an overcoat that had patches on it. The wind made the woman shake, and she looked like a bird that had just rolled out of its warm nest. "Why is this happening? Why is she outside when it's so cold? She's going to make herself sick," Quentin thought to himself with concern. When Melanie entered the kitchen, the man was on the verge of leaving the house. In response to the astonished expression on her husband's face, the woman asked, "Is that elderly woman sitting on the bench outside once more? That's where I saw her yesterday and the day before. Her usual time to visit is during lunch, but she got here early today." "What's she doing there?" Quentin commented that there must have been an explanation for her to come over. "I'm still not sure. In most cases, she does nothing but sit there and observe the people who pass her by. Afterwards, she gets up in the late afternoon and walks off to some unknown location. This is something that she's been doing for 3 days now," Melanie added. Quentin showing his understanding by shaking his head, adding, "I've tried to invite her to come inside, but she refused." The woman continued, rubbing her belly as she spoke. Quentin showed his amazement, stunned at the resilience of this elderly woman who appeared to be weak. It was true that he had always been kind to homeless people, because he had grown up in an orphanage without any parental care or love. Quentin placed a higher importance on his family than anything else in the world. He considered it to be the most important thing in his life. People who took care of Quentin said he was brought in by a baby carrier and left at the front door, so he didn't know who his parents were. A pair of diapers, a bottle of milk, and a little crucifix were all that were found at the bottom of the carrier. Additionally, there was a change of clothes that was placed there. The fact that the cross was made of gold, but was hung on an ordinary string, was the most intriguing aspect of the situation. He still wore the cross to remember the past, and he thought of it as a gift from his mother to say goodbye. The man never said anything bad about his mother taking her newborn son to the orphanage. When Quentin saw the lovely old woman sitting on the bench outside, he knew right away that he had to find out what was wrong. He took his jacket, went outside, and took a deep breath of cold air. On the other hand, the stranger lifted her head and gazed at him with eyes that were red from the wind. The elderly woman sat motionless and appeared as though she had become a statue. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "Is there anything I am able to assist you with?" For a while, the stranger remained silent. However, she eventually built up the confidence to speak out and whispered in a low voice,
"No, but thank you. If it's not too much trouble, I'd like to remain here for a bit longer before I step out of this place."
The elderly woman's response caused Quentin to feel anxious. When the man realized something was wrong, he set out to learn as much as he could about the old woman. "Aren't you cold sitting out in this weather for so long?" Quentin said with concern.
"Actually, I'm not bothered by it at all,"
the elderly woman added with a sniff.
"I used to spend a lot of time outside."
"I'm Quentin Donahue," said the man. "The house across the street is where I live. Perhaps you would be interested in coming in for a cup of tea. Also, some pie was left from the previous day. It's really good because my wife knows a way around the kitchen." Quentin put forward his proposal. The elderly lady's eyes brightened up with a glimmer of excitement when the topic of hot tea was brought up.
"My name is Charlotte Douglas. I'm sorry, but I can't have the pie. But I would really enjoy a cup of tea. Thank you for offering."
While the elderly lady was walking on the snowy road, Quentin guided her inside the house while holding her hand. Melanie, who had already presented a meal and understood everything without words, met the elderly woman there. Melanie had already managed to cook a simple breakfast. After eating the food, Miss Douglas expressed her gratitude to the hosts for their kindness.
"Your house is beautiful. It's so cozy,"
the old woman said through tears.
"Our best effort is to keep it clean, but I can't do as well as the previous owner. When we moved in, the house sparkled,"
Melanie stated with a smile. Suddenly, the old woman's face turned pale, and she started breathing quickly and loudly. "Do you feel sick? Is it necessary to call an ambulance?" Quentin asked worriedly, but Miss Douglas had already gotten up and said she didn't need any help.
No, no ambulance is needed. I'm doing well. It's nothing more than my memories,"
the elderly woman murmured. After a while, Quentin couldn't help but feel sorry for the elderly visitor. It was at that precise moment that he had the impression that the elderly lady was either extremely lonely or really unhappy, or even both. "Where do you live?" Quentin asked with concern. Charlotte tensed up when he asked her, but she lowered her eyes and said,
"I'm staying with a friend not far from here. I decided to come over and take a seat on the bench."
The expression on Quentin's face expressed genuine surprise. Despite the fact that Charlotte had traveled all the way to his house, the man was unable to comprehend the reasons behind her decision to sit on the bench in the severe weather. The man was about to ask another question when Miss Douglas said,
"This house used to be mine, but my son sold it, so it appears I'm homeless now."
"How is it even theoretically possible? The question is, how could your son abandon you in such a precarious situation?" Quentin yelled at himself. How could someone be so harsh to their own mother was something that the man simply could not comprehend. In spite of this, he was now aware of the reasons why the seller was in such a big hurry to sell the house, and was practically pleading with him to finalize the transaction as quickly as possible. That's why the house was so clean. It was not her son who kept it all in order, Quentin thought, shocked by what he had just realized. Charlotte Douglas started talking about her past without even realizing it. On closer inspection, it was discovered that Charlotte and Benjamin Douglas had purchased this residence almost 50 years ago. At the time, the house appeared to be something that would have been found in the tail of the three little pigs, and it appeared as though it could have been destroyed by the slightest breeze. Things, however, took a significant turn for the better once Charlotte and Benjamin remodeled the house and had the roof replaced. They welcomed their daughter Linda into the world a year later. There was hope that Charlotte and Benjamin's family could finally be together. To make it last, they had to love and be loyal to each other until the end of their lives. Disappointingly, the reality was a little different.
Linda was a child who was always independent. In addition, she did not enjoy studying at all, so she skipped school, Charlotte remarked with a sigh of regret. She had a dream of becoming a model.
So what happened next? Quentin said, showing an expression of real interest. The look that was on the elderly woman's face made it quite evident that it was extremely challenging for her to speak of it at all.
After high school, Linda met a biker and went with him to a different city. She used to send us Christmas cards and ask for money in the beginning, but then she stopped talking to us, and I haven't heard from her since. After some time, my husband passed in an accident on the river. I lost my whole family. Benjamin's boat flipped over, and the current carried his body away,
Charlotte said, wiping away a tear. When Quentin and Melanie heard the story that the old woman had to tell, they were completely taken away. The lady's story was so strange that the couple felt bad for her and all she had gone through.
I had been living on my own for a while before I came into contact with a man named Bruce. He had a son named Richie. I helped Richie with his homework, took care of him after his father died, and tried to help him in any way I could. But my stepson did not like me from the moment he met me. How he chose to express his gratitude to me was by selling my house and kicking me out on the street. But it's most likely all because he had a problem with gambling. The only thing that appears to be important to Richie is playing cards, and it appears to be the only thing that he cares about,
Charlotte Douglas concluded. Melanie's eyes were filled with tears by the time the elderly lady had finished her story. The woman was completely perplexed as to how Mrs. Douglas's son could have behaved in such a harsh manner towards her. How was it possible to put another person out in the street in such freezing temperatures for the sole purpose of financial gain? Melanie thought as she shivered. The woman knew that the husband was thinking the same thing as she was when they exchanged gazes with each other.
Miss Douglas, ma'am, this is your house. So we thought, how would you feel about staying with us?
Melanie said, but she stuttered through every word. A brief spark of optimism appeared in Charlotte Douglas's eyes, but it vanished almost as swiftly as it appeared.
No, you already have your own family, and you are going to become parents in the near future. I do not wish to make you feel any discomfort,
said the old lady. But once Quentin and Melanie knew what Charlotte had been through, they couldn't be stopped. They knew the reason Miss Douglas kept coming back to look at their old house a few months ago. Even though it was her house, her bad stepson sold it after getting the old woman to stay with him. Quentin quickly figured out which room she used to live in. The man said with a smile, "You can take this room. The three of us will be fine." The old woman had tears in her eyes. Charlotte thought she had stepped into a fairy tale where good had finally won over evil.
"Thank you."
With a sob, the woman replied,
"Thank you so much."
After giving him a smile, Quentin got ready for work. It made the man feel great about himself and the choice his family had made. They took Miss Douglas in as a resident from that day on. Every day, Charlotte and Melanie baked wonderful pies and talked about their lives. The old woman talked about her childhood and how much she missed her daughter Linda.
"I have no idea where she lives. Is she still alive?"
the old woman said.
"Maybe she got married and have 3 lovely children, or maybe she still travels the country like she used to."
Melanie couldn't confirm or deny what the woman said, so she just listened and really appreciated Charlotte's strength. After a month, Miss Douglas felt better than she had in a long time. Melanie frequently woke up at night, worried about the birth that was coming.
"Don't panic, my sweetheart."
While Charlotte was attempting to calm the woman down, she said,
"You'll do incredible."
Melanie's ability to cook and clean was becoming increasingly difficult, so the elderly woman took up their responsibilities. However, following that, something occurred that completely changed the course of their lives. At first glance, it did not appear to be anything special, or to have the potential to drastically alter the course of their lives. On the morning that will live long in their memory, Quentin made the decision to change his shirt and put it in the washing machine. After putting on nothing but a t-shirt, the man went to his room to fetch a fresh shirt to wear inside. Quentin ran to Charlotte at that very moment. Charlotte was on their way to the kitchen to get Melanie a glass of water. Quentin caught up to Charlotte. Initially, the elderly lady did not take much note of anything, but when something suddenly appeared on Quentin's chest, she was unable to believe what she was seeing. The woman moved closer to Quentin and gently stroked the crucifix that was hanging around his neck. She did this while squinting her eyes more. Following the involuntary step backwards that the man took, he gazed at the elderly woman with surprise on his face.
"Where did you get that thing?"
Miss Douglas asked in a low voice. "I don't know for sure, but according to the caretakers from the orphanage, this cross was in the baby carrier, along with some clothes and a bottle of milk," Quentin stated with a sigh. Charlotte's eyes began to tear up. In spite of the fact that she was still unaware of what was going on, Quentin took the elderly woman by the hand and invited her into the living room. "What's the matter? Do you feel okay?" the man asked. The woman said,
"Fine. Everything's fine."
but she couldn't stop crying. Quentin had the impression that the elderly woman was becoming increasingly odd, and he believed that this was connected to the fact that he was carrying a cross. Before Charlotte was able to gather herself together and become somewhat calm, it took her around half an hour. Though, the entirety of this time, Quentin remained still at her side and didn't ask any questions. He saw that the old woman was going through something very personal that only she knew about. But when Charlotte started to talk, Quentin winced at the shocking truth.
"This is the cross that belongs to my daughter Linda. I had it made for Linda, and I gave it to her right before she left,"
the older woman said in a sad voice. Quentin was shocked beyond belief. There was a chance that his mother was Charlotte Douglas's daughter Linda, who had run away with a biker a long time ago. Of course, Quentin knew that he might be wrong, and that he had just jumped to conclusions too quickly. Despite this, the man felt a great deal of compassion for the old lady, and couldn't help but reflect on the fact that such coincidences happened in everyday life very rarely. To make sure they were sure, Quentin suggested that they get a DNA test. They had to wait for the results of the tests for almost 1 week, but once they were received, they were finally able to find the answer that they had been looking for all along. There was no question that Charlotte Douglas and Quentin Donahue were linked. When Quentin thought about how his life had been taking strange turns lately, he couldn't help but cry. It was quite amazing that they had never been aware of each other's existence, yet all of a sudden, life brought them together. At that point, Quentin made the decision to make an effort to find his mother, and he did so by contacting a private investigator. For some reason, he was under the impression that it would be very easy to track down a woman named Linda Douglas in a town that was very small. After a month had gone by with no word from the detective, Quentin and Charlotte received a phone call from the detective informing them that Linda Douglas had passed away. But the detective did not provide any further information. She didn't die in a terrible accident or from a disease that couldn't be cured. Alcohol was the cause of Linda's life's downfall. After her relationship with her lover ended, she began drinking regularly and was unable to quit for the rest of her life. It was precisely for this reason that the mother made the decision to take her son to the orphanage in order to free herself from the responsibilities of being a parent. Linda felt bad about the choices she had made, so she gave her cross to her son, and he kept it all his life. After all, it would appear that the woman did, in fact, have some material feelings. When Charlotte got to the grave of her daughter, she knelt down and asked the woman to forgive her for not finding her sooner. Last but not least, Melanie had 2 beautiful babies a few days later, and Charlotte Douglas became a great-grandmother. It just so happened that her life changed so drastically when she was very old. Miss Douglas was finally able to express the tranquility and fulfillment that she had been seeking for a long time, after she was reunited with her family. Melanie and Quentin, on the other hand, were overjoyed to learn that their children would have a great-grandmother who would watch over them and shower them with her love and compassion.